The trading station orbiting Kepler 442b hummed with the usual cacophony of alien languages, mechanical whirs, and atmospheric recyclers working overtime. Marcus Chin stood at the edge of the main commerce deck, watching the controlled chaos unfold before him. Towering Vorthack merchants negotiated with spindly Zealoth traders, their multiple arms gesticulating wildly as they argued over shipping rates. Near the information kiosks, a group of crystalline shard beings pulsed with different colored lights, their method of communication both beautiful and incomprehensible to most organic species. Marcus pulled his worn leather jacket tighter around his shoulders. The station's environmental controls were calibrated for the Galactic Confederacy's standard atmosphere, which meant it was too cold for human comfort and had an oxygen content that left him slightly lightheaded after prolonged exposure. He'd been on the station for 3 days now, waiting for transport to the Outer Rim colonies, and the stares hadn't stopped. It wasn't unusual for humans to draw attention in Confederate space. Earth had only joined the galactic community 15 years ago, making humans the newest species in a confederation that included over 200 different intelligent life forms. What made Marcus particularly noteworthy was that he was traveling alone, and he was armed. The weapon strapped to his thigh was primitive by galactic standards. While most species carried energy-based weapons that could disintegrate matter at the molecular level, Marcus wore a simple projectile pistol. The Confederacy's weapon registration database listed it as a kinetic projectile launcher, a description that made most aliens chuckle. Why would anyone use a weapon that threw small pieces of metal when you could unmake your enemies with a thought? "Excuse me, human," a voice said behind him, the words delivered through a translation device that gave everything a slightly electronic tinge. Marcus turned to see a Vorthack approaching, its reptilian features arranged in what he'd learned was their equivalent of a friendly expression. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that shifted from deep green to purple depending on the lighting. For arms extended from its torso, each ending in hands with 3 thick fingers. "Yes," Marcus replied, keeping his voice neutral. He'd learned that showing too much emotion could be misinterpreted by alien species who communicated in ways humans were still trying to understand. "I am Kethvor of the merchant vessel Stellar Prophet. I couldn't help but notice you've been waiting here for some time." The Vorthack's secondary arms gestured toward the departure boards. "The next transport to the Outer Rim doesn't leave for another 6 standard days." Marcus nodded. He'd known this when he'd booked passage, but it was the cheapest option available, and his funds were limited. "I am aware. Perhaps I could offer you alternative transportation? My ship is heading to the Zirian system, which would put you much closer to your destination." Kethvor's scales shifted to a lighter green, which Marcus interpreted as either excitement or possibly hunger. With the Vorthack, it was sometimes hard to tell. "What's the cost?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Well, that's the interesting part," Kethvor said, his primary hands clasping together. "I'm not looking for monetary compensation. You see, there's been some trouble in the shipping lanes. Pirates, mostly. Small-time opportunists looking for easy targets. My ship has defensive capabilities, but we're primarily merchants, not fighters." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And you think one human with a primitive weapon is going to make the difference?" "Oh, I don't expect you to fight, human Marcus Chun." The use of his full name caught Marcus off guard until he realized the alien had probably accessed his public registration information. "But your species has a certain reputation. Pirates are superstitious creatures, and the stories about human unpredictability have spread throughout the outer systems. Your mere presence might be enough to discourage attacks." It was true that humans had developed a reputation in the 15 years since first contact. Most of it wasn't particularly flattering. Humans were known for being emotional, unpredictable, and prone to violence. They were also known for their stubborn refusal to die when logic dictated they should. There had been enough incidents of humans surviving impossible situations that many alien species had begun to view them as either extremely lucky or completely insane. Marcus considered the offer. Kethvor's ship would get him to the outer rim faster, and he wouldn't have to spend nearly a week breathing recycled air on this station. On the other hand, traveling with unknown aliens into pirate-infested space lanes didn't exactly sound like a vacation. "What kind of cargo are you carrying?" he asked. Kethvor's scales darkened slightly. "Medical supplies, mostly. Vaccines for a plague outbreak on Zirian 3. Nothing particularly valuable to pirates, which is why I'm surprised we've been having trouble." That gave Marcus pause. Medical supplies for a plague outbreak weren't typical pirate targets. Pirates went after luxury goods, rare minerals, or technology they could fence in black markets. Intercepting medical shipments was not only unprofitable, but also likely to draw the attention of Confederate law enforcement. "How many ships have you lost?" Marcus asked. "3 in the past month," Kethvor admitted, "all carrying similar cargo. The pirates don't even take the medical supplies. They just destroy them and leave." Now Marcus was interested. This wasn't ordinary piracy. It was sabotage. Someone didn't want medical supplies reaching Zirian 3, which meant the plague outbreak might not be as natural as it appeared. And if there was one thing Marcus had learned in his 5 years as an independent investigator, it was that unnatural plagues usually had very human motives behind them. "I'll take the job," Marcus said, "but I want to know everything about these attacks. Ship manifests, attack locations, survivor testimony, everything." Kethvor's scales brightened considerably. "Excellent. We depart in 4 hours. I'll have my crew prepare quarters for you." As the Vorthak merchant walked away, Marcus noticed the subtle changes in the station's atmosphere around him. Conversations that had been conducted in normal tones dropped to whispers. Several groups of aliens that had been loitering nearby suddenly found pressing business elsewhere. Word was already spreading that the human had taken a job. Marcus made his way to the station's small human quarter, a section that had been hastily retrofitted with Earth-standard atmosphere and temperature controls after humans had started showing up in Confederate space. It consisted of a small restaurant that served approximations of human food, a shop that sold Earth imports at ridiculous prices, and a few rooms for rent that were designed with human physiology in mind. The restaurant was empty except for a single waitress, a young human woman with short black hair and tired eyes. She looked up from the data pad she'd been reading when Marcus entered. "Let me guess," she said without preamble. "You're the human everyone's talking about. The one who's going to ride with the Vorthak merchants." Marcus settled into a booth designed for human proportions and nodded. "News travels fast." "It does when there's only about 50 humans in this entire sector," she replied, approaching his table. "I'm Sarakim. I've been stranded here for about 2 months, waiting for enough credits to book passage home." "Stranded how?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Long story. Let's just say I learned the hard way that human labor contracts don't translate well into Confederate law. By the time I figured out my employer was basically using slave labor loopholes, I was broke and stuck." Marcus studied her face. There was intelligence there and a hardness that spoke of recent difficult experiences. "What did you do before you got stranded?" "Communications specialist. Xenolinguistics, specifically. I can speak or understand about 30 alien languages without a translator." She gestured toward the translation device on Marcus's collar. "Most humans rely on those things, but they're not always accurate. Sometimes the nuance gets lost, and nuance can be the difference between a successful negotiation and starting a war." "Interested in a job?" Marcus asked impulsively. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "With the Vorthak merchants? I heard you're heading into pirate territory." "I am, and I have a feeling this job is going to be more complicated than it appears. Having someone who can understand exactly what aliens are saying without the filter of a translation device might be useful." Sarah considered this for a moment. "What's the pay?" "Transportation to the outer rim, plus whatever bonus we negotiate if we solve their piracy problem." "You think it's solvable?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Pirates don't usually waste time destroying medical supplies. Someone wants that plague to continue spreading, which means someone is profiting from it. Find the profit motive, find the pirates." Sarah nodded slowly. That's actually a decent theory. All right, I'm in. But I want it on record that I'm a civilian contractor, not a combatant. Fair enough. 2 hours later, Marcus and Sarah stood in the docking bay, watching as Kethvor's ship, the Stellar Prophet, prepared for departure. The vessel was typical of Vorthack design, functional rather than elegant, with a bulbous cargo section attached to a smaller crew compartment. It was painted in the neutral grays and blues that most merchant vessels use to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Kethvor greeted them at the airlock, his scales showing patterns Marcus was beginning to recognize as pleased excitement. Excellent. 2 humans will provide even more deterrent effect than I hoped. As they boarded the ship, Marcus noticed the crew's reaction to their presence. The Vorthack species communicated as much through color changes in their scales as they did through vocalized language, and he was seeing a lot of rapid shifting between different hues. Sarah, walking beside him, was paying attention to their conversations. "They're nervous," she said quietly. "Not about pirates, about us." "What are they saying?" "The usual stuff about human unpredictability. But there's something else. One of them mentioned something about the dead species walking. That's not translating properly through your device." Marcus made a mental note to ask Sarah about that later. As they were shown to their quarters, 2 small but comfortable cabins near the crew section, Kethvor provided them with ship schematics and security protocols. "The journey to Zirian should take 8 standard days," he explained. "We'll be traveling through 3 different shipping lanes, all of which have seen recent pirate activity. I've uploaded all the attack data to your quarters terminals." Once Kethvor left them alone, Marcus and Sarah retreated to Marcus's cabin to review the information. The attack data was extensive, but also puzzling. The pirates seemed to know exactly which ships were carrying medical supplies, and they struck with surgical precision. No demands for surrender, no attempts to board and steal cargo. Just quick, devastating attacks that left the ships destroyed and their crews either dead or stranded. "This is professional work," Sarah observed, studying the tactical analysis. "These aren't opportunistic pirates. This is a coordinated campaign." Marcus nodded, pulling up a galactic map on his terminal. "Look at the attack locations. They're all clustered around jump gate routes that lead to Zirian system. Someone's trying to create a quarantine." "But why?" Sarah asked. "What's special about this particular plague?" "That's what we need to find out. And I have a feeling we're going to get our chance soon." As if summoned by his words, the ship's intercom crackled to life. Kethvor's voice, tense with anxiety, echoed through the cabin. "Human passengers, please report to the bridge immediately. We have a problem." Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances before making their way through the ship's corridors to the bridge. The Stellar Prophet's command center was compact, but well-designed, with stations for the ship's crew of 6 Vorthack. Every scale on every crew member was showing rapid color changes, a sure sign of extreme stress. "What's the situation?" Marcus asked. Kethvor gestured toward the main display screen, which showed a 3-dimensional representation of local space. 2 red dots were approaching their position from different vectors. "Pirate ships," Kethvor explained. "They dropped out of hyperspace just outside our sensor range and are now moving to intercept. Based on their approach pattern, they plan to trap us between them." Marcus studied the tactical display. The approaching ships were smaller than the Stellar Prophet, but significantly faster and more heavily armed. In a straight fight, the merchant vessel wouldn't stand a chance. "Have they transmitted any demands?" he asked. "None. No communication at all, which is unusual. Pirates typically make demands before attacking." Sarah was listening to the bridge crew's conversations, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "Marcus," she said quietly, "they're talking about something called the cleansing protocol. That term isn't translating through your device, but I think it means they're planning to eliminate all witnesses." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't piracy, it was assassination. Someone wanted to ensure that the medical supplies never reached their destination, and they were willing to kill everyone involved to make it happen. "Can we outrun them?" he asked. Not in open space. The ship's pilot responded through his translator. Our only option would be to jump to hyperspace, but our jump drive won't be ready for another 20 minutes. And they'll intercept us in 15, Kethvor added grimly. Marcus looked around the bridge at the nervous alien crew. These beings were merchants, not warriors. They had never expected to face a situation like this, and their fear was palpable. But Marcus had been in worse situations before, and he had learned that sometimes the key to survival was doing exactly what your enemies didn't expect. Kethvor, he said, I need to know everything about your ship's capabilities. Defensive systems, maneuverability, cargo bay configuration, everything. Marcus, Sarah said urgently, what are you thinking? Marcus smiled grimly. I'm thinking that these pirates have never fought humans before, and I'm thinking it's time they learned why the galaxy considers us to be completely insane. The next few minutes would determine whether the reputation for human unpredictability was deserved or whether it would die with them in the cold vacuum of space. But as Marcus began to formulate a plan that would have horrified any sane species in the galaxy, he found himself looking forward to the challenge. After all, he hadn't survived 5 years as an independent investigator by playing it safe. Marcus moved through the Stellar Prophet's corridors with purpose, his mind racing through calculations and possibilities. Sarah followed close behind, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity as she watched him examine various systems and compartments with an intensity that seemed to make the Vorthack crew even more nervous. Marcus, talk to me, Sarah said as he knelt beside an access panel in the cargo bay. What exactly are you planning? Something that violates about 12 different Confederate safety protocols, Marcus replied, pulling tools from his jacket pocket. The Vorthack had been thorough in their security screening, but they had missed the innocuous-looking multi-tool that Marcus had disguised as a simple writing instrument. How much do you know about human military history? Sarah frowned. Enough to know that we've spent most of our existence finding creative ways to kill each other. What? Marcus began working on the access panel, his movements quick and precise. There's a battle from Earth's Second World War. A destroyer called the USS Johnston faced an entire Japanese fleet. Outgunned, outnumbered, no chance of survival. You know what they did? I'm guessing they didn't surrender. They attacked. Marcus grinned as the panel came free, revealing a maze of conduits and power couplings. Charged straight at the enemy fleet. The Japanese were so surprised by the sheer audacity of it that they mistook the destroyer for a cruiser and retreated. Sarah watched as Marcus began tracing specific power lines through the ship's infrastructure. And you think the same tactic will work against these pirates? Not the same tactic, Marcus corrected, the same principle. These pirates are professionals. They've studied merchant ship capabilities, defensive systems, standard evasive maneuvers. They know exactly how this engagement is supposed to go. He paused, looking up at her with eyes that held a dangerous gleam. But they've never fought humans before. 15 minutes remained until the pirate ships would reach intercept range. Marcus had spent 10 of those minutes moving through the ship like a man possessed, examining systems, asking rapid-fire questions about ship capabilities, and making modifications that left the Vorthack crew exchanging worried glances. Sarah had appointed herself as translator and intermediary, helping to explain Marcus's increasingly bizarre requests to the bewildered aliens. He wants us to what? Kethvor asked for the third time, his scales cycling through colors that Sarah was beginning to recognize as extreme confusion. Vent 30% of the cargo bay atmosphere, Sarah repeated, and reroute power from life support to the navigational thrusters. That makes no sense, the pilot protested. Reducing atmospheric pressure in the cargo bay will destabilize the medical supplies, and cutting life support power will leave us with barely enough air for another hour. Sarah looked at Marcus, who was now working on something inside a maintenance shaft. Care to explain the logic behind this? Physics, Marcus called out, his voice echoing through the shaft. And The fact that these pirates are expecting us to behave like rational beings. There is a sound of sparking electronics, followed by Marcus swearing in what Sarah assumed was English. Sarah asked them about their escape pods. Escape pods? How many? What's their range? And can they be launched remotely? Sarah translated the question. Kethvor's scales shifted to a deep purple that she had learned indicated deep thought. We have 6 pods, each with a range of approximately 1 light hour. They can be programmed for automatic launch, yes. But why would we? The ship's proximity alarms began blaring, interrupting his question. The bridge crew's voices rose in pitch as they reported the pirates' approach. Sarah could understand enough of their rapid communication to know that the situation was deteriorating quickly. Marcus emerged from the maintenance shaft, his jacket now torn and his hands covered in what looked like coolant fluid. Time's up. Sarah, I need you to explain something to the crew, and they're not going to like it. What? In about 3 minutes, I'm going to turn this merchant ship into something that defies every law of physics that these pirates think they understand. Marcus wiped his hands on his jacket and headed toward the bridge. And in order for it to work, everyone on this ship is going to have to trust a human to do something that any sane species would consider suicidal. The bridge was in controlled chaos when they arrived. The 2 pirate ships had closed to within weapons range and were positioning themselves for a classic pincer attack. The Stellar Prophet's defensive systems were charging, though everyone knew they would be woefully inadequate against military-grade weapons. Status report, Marcus said, settling into an empty station as if he belonged there. Pirates will be in optimal firing position in 90 seconds, the tactical officer reported. They're maintaining communication silence and have not responded to any of our attempts at contact. Which means they're not here to rob us, Sarah observed. They're here to eliminate us. Marcus nodded grimly and began entering commands into the station's interface. The Vorthack writing system was completely alien to him, but ship control systems followed universal logic patterns that transcended language barriers. Kethvor, I need you to trust me completely for the next 5 minutes. Can you do that? The merchant captain's scales were showing rapid color changes that Sarah interpreted as fear, confusion, and desperate hope fighting for dominance. Human Marcus, what you are proposing violates every safety protocol in the Confederate shipping manual. If we survive this, we will lose our operating license. If we don't do this, Marcus replied, his fingers dancing over the control interface, being dead will make the licensing issue irrelevant. The first pirate ship opened fire. Energy beams lanced through space, striking the Stellar Prophet's shields and causing the entire vessel to shudder. Warning lights flashed across the bridge as systems began to overload. Shields down to 60%, the tactical officer reported. We can't take much more of this. We won't have to, Marcus said. His modifications to the ship's systems were now active, and the results were immediately apparent to anyone watching the sensor displays. The Stellar Prophet's energy signature began fluctuating wildly. Its mass readings shifted unpredictably, and its thermal output spiked in patterns that suggested massive internal explosions. What are you doing? Kate demanded. Making us look like we're dying, Marcus replied. Sarah, start launching escape pods on randomized trajectories. I want the pirates to think the crew is abandoning ship. Sarah translated the order, and within moments, 6 escape pods ejected from the Stellar Prophet, their emergency beacons broadcasting distress signals as they scattered in different directions. To anyone monitoring the engagement, it would appear that the merchant vessel had suffered catastrophic damage, and its crew was fleeing for their lives. The pirates seemed to buy the deception. Their rate of fire decreased, and their formation became less aggressive as they moved to confirm the kill. This was exactly what Marcus had been counting on. Now comes the fun part, he said, taking control of the ship's navigation system. Everyone hold on to something solid. What happened next would have been impossible for any other species in the galaxy to contemplate, let alone execute. Marcus fired the Stellar Prophet's main engines at full power while simultaneously reversing the output of the maneuvering thrusters. The result was a violent spinning motion that sent the ship tumbling end over end while still maintaining forward momentum. The effect was devastating on multiple levels. First, it made the ship nearly impossible to target accurately, as its position was constantly changing in unpredictable ways. Second, it masked the ship's true intentions until the last possible moment. Third, it convinced the pirates that the merchant vessel was completely out of control and posed no threat. They were wrong on that last point. Marcus had spent his time modifying the ship's systems to reroute power from non-essential systems to the cargo bay's magnetic containment fields. The medical supplies in the bay were now held in place by forces strong enough to contain antimatter. When he reversed the polarity of those fields and opened the bay doors, the result was a massive ejection of cargo containers that flew outward from the spinning ship like bullets from a giant gun. The first pirate ship was caught completely off guard. Designed to withstand energy weapons and conventional explosives, its shields were useless against kinetic impact from objects moving at significant fractions of the speed of light. Cargo containers weighing several tons each slammed into the pirate vessel's hull, punching through armor plating and causing massive decompression events throughout the ship. The second pirate ship attempted to evade, but Marcus had anticipated this. The spinning motion of the Stellar Prophet created a constantly changing field of debris that made evasion impossible. More cargo containers found their mark, and within moments, both pirate vessels were drifting hulks, their crews either dead or frantically evacuating in their own escape pods. "Impossible," Kethvor whispered, his scales showing colors that Sarah didn't recognize. "No merchant vessel has ever destroyed military ships in combat. The mathematics alone." "The mathematics work fine," Marcus said, beginning the process of stabilizing their flight path. "You just have to be willing to ignore the parts that tell you it's a bad idea." Sarah was staring at the sensor displays, watching the debris from the destroyed pirate ships drift through space. "Marcus, that was actually insane. You turned a merchant ship into a kinetic weapon by making it spin like a top and throwing cargo at the enemy. It worked, didn't it?" "Yes, but..." Sarah struggled for words. No sane species would ever attempt something like that. The risk of losing control, the chance of tearing the ship apart, the possibility of killing everyone aboard. Marcus shrugged. "Risk assessment is a luxury you can't afford when you're fighting for your life. Besides, I had it under control the whole time." That was only partially true. There had been several moments during the maneuver when Marcus wasn't entirely certain they would survive. But doubt was a luxury he couldn't afford either, especially when the lives of his allies depended on his ability to project confidence in impossible situations. The aftermath of the battle brought its own challenges. The Stellar Prophet had suffered significant damage during the engagement, and several critical systems needed repair before they could continue their journey. More importantly, the destruction of the pirate ships had raised new questions about what they were really dealing with. Sarah had managed to intercept some of the communications from the pirate ships before they were destroyed, and what she heard troubled her. "Marcus, these weren't ordinary pirates. The crew members I could identify were all former Confederate military. Special operations, by the sound of their tactical communications. Mercenaries," Marcus concluded. "Someone hired professional soldiers to stop these medical supplies from reaching Zirian. The question is who and why." Kethvor approached them as they worked on emergency repairs in the cargo bay. The Vorthat captain's scales were showing a steady blue pattern that Sarah had learned indicated deep respect. "Human Marcus, I owe you an apology. When I hired you, I thought your presence would merely discourage attacks through reputation. I never expected you to actually engage enemy vessels in combat. I hope you never have to again," Marcus replied, sealing a hull breach with emergency patch material. "But I have a feeling this was just the beginning. Professional mercenaries don't come cheap, and whoever hired them has access to detailed information about Confederate shipping schedules. We're dealing with someone with serious resources and connections. What do you suggest we do?" Marcus paused in his work, considering their options. They could abort the mission and return to the trading station, but that would mean abandoning the plague victims on Zirian 3. They could continue to their destination and hope there were no more attacks, but that seemed unlikely given the professional nature of their opposition. Or they could take a more aggressive approach. We're going to finish this job, Marcus decided, but we're going to do it smart. Sarah, I need you to analyze everything you intercepted from those pirate communications. Ship registrations, crew manifests, anything that might tell us who they were working for. And then what? Then we're going to hunt down whoever is behind this and make them regret the day they decided to interfere with human business. Sarah looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. Marcus, you do realize that we're just two humans in a damaged merchant ship, right? We're not exactly equipped for a war against organized crime syndicates or corrupt governments. Marcus smiled, and Sarah noticed that there was something predatory in his expression, something that reminded her that humans had evolved from persistent hunters who could track prey across continents and never give up. Sarah, let me tell you something about humans that the rest of the galaxy hasn't figured out yet. We're not just unpredictable or stubborn or violent. We're the species that turned hunting into an art form. We tracked mammoth across ice ages. We pursued prey for days without rest, and we never, ever stopped until we got what we were after. He turned back to his repair work, but his voice carried a certainty that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. Whoever is behind this made a mistake when they decided to target humans. They thought they were dealing with just another species that would give up when things got difficult. They're about to learn that humans don't give up. We get even. As the Stellar Prophet limped toward its destination, its cargo bay now empty, but its mission unchanged, Marcus began planning their next move. The battle with the pirates had been won, but the war was just beginning. And somewhere in the galaxy, the people responsible for the attacks were about to discover why humanity's reputation for relentless pursuit was well-earned. The hunt was on. The Zirian system greeted them with suspicious silence. As the damaged Stellar Prophet limped toward Zirian 3, Marcus stood on the bridge, studying long-range sensor readings that made increasingly little sense. The planet below showed all the signs of a world in the grip of a devastating plague, but something was wrong with the picture. Population centers are showing expected quarantine patterns, the ship's sensor operator reported, his scales flickering through shades of orange that Sarah had learned indicated confusion. But energy readings are unusual. Marcus leaned over the sensor display, frowning at the data streams. Define unusual. Power consumption in the quarantine zones is actually higher than normal, Sarah said, translating the more complex parts of the Vortex explanation. That doesn't make sense if people are dying. Quarantine zones should show reduced activity, not increased. Unless the quarantine isn't about keeping people in, Marcus realized. It's about keeping people out. Kethvor approached them with a datapad in his primary hands. I've been reviewing the shipping manifests for all the medical supplies we were supposed to deliver. Human Marcus, I think you should see this. Marcus took the pad and studied the contents. What he saw made his blood run cold. The medical supplies weren't vaccines for treating a plague. They were diagnostic equipment, sophisticated scanning devices capable of detecting specific genetic markers in biological samples. These aren't plague relief supplies, Marcus said slowly. They're investigation tools. Sarah looked over his shoulder at the manifest. Investigation tools for what? For determining whether the plague is natural or artificial. Marcus handed the pad back to Kethvor. Someone doesn't want anyone to know what's really happening down there. Before anyone could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. A voice speaking galactic standard with a crisp military accent filled the bridge. Merchant Vessel Stellar Prophet, this is Zirian System Control. You are ordered to maintain your current position and await escort to quarantine processing. Any deviation from this course will be met with defensive action. Marcus exchanged glances with Sarah. That's not Zirian System Control, she whispered. I can hear the linguistic patterns underneath the translation. That's someone speaking hegemony standard, not Confederate common. The hegemony. Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place in his mind. The Krolon hegemony was a coalition of species that had been pushing for expansion into Confederate territory for decades. They were known for their ruthless efficiency and their willingness to use biological weapons when conventional warfare proved inconvenient. Kethvor, Marcus said quietly, "I need to know everything about your ship's stealth capabilities. We have basic sensor dampening for avoiding customs inspections." The Vorthack captain replied nervously. "Nothing military grade." "Why?" "Because we're not dealing with pirates anymore. We're dealing with an invasion force that's using a fake plague as cover." Marcus moved to the navigation station and began plotting a course that would take them around the main shipping lanes. They've established a quarantine zone to keep Confederate ships away while they set up their operation. The diagnostic equipment we were carrying would have exposed the whole thing. Invasion. Kethvor's scales went through a rapid series of color changes that Sarah interpreted as panic. But the Confederate fleet would have detected. Not if they made it look like a natural disaster. Marcus interrupted. Create a fake plague, establish quarantine protocols to keep official investigators away, and use the chaos to infiltrate and establish control. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, they're already entrenched. The ship shuddered as energy beams lanced past them, fired by vessels that had apparently been waiting in ambush. The escort that Xerian system control had promised turned out to be 3 hegemony cruisers, their weapons already charging for another salvo. "Shields are failing," the tactical officer reported. "We cannot survive another direct hit." Marcus was already moving, his hands dancing over the navigation controls with the same desperate precision he'd shown during their encounter with the pirates. But this time, they faced military vessels with trained crews and advanced targeting systems. The improvised tactics that had worked against mercenaries would be useless here. "Sarah, I need you to get on the communications array," he said, his voice tight with concentration. "Send a message on Confederate emergency frequencies. Full data burst. Everything we've learned about the hegemony operation." "Marcus, even if the message gets through, it will take hours for Confederate forces to respond. We'll be dead long before then." "I know." Marcus's fingers flew over the controls, pushing the damaged ship's engines beyond their safe operating limits. "But at least someone will know the truth." The Stellar Prophet dove toward the planet's surface, using the atmosphere to mask their energy signature and complicate targeting solutions. It was a desperate maneuver that would either buy them precious time or get them killed more quickly, but it was the only option available. As they plunged through the upper atmosphere, Marcus got his first clear look at what was happening on Xerion 3. The quarantine zones weren't abandoned plague areas. They were construction sites. Massive installations were being built with the kind of speed and efficiency that only automated systems could achieve. Landing platforms, communication arrays, and what looked suspiciously like weapons emplacements. "It's a forward operating base," Sarah breathed, staring at the sensor readings. "They're turning the entire planet into a military staging area. And we're the only ones who know about it," Marcus replied grimly. The hegemony cruisers followed them into the atmosphere, their weapons lighting up the sky as they attempted to destroy the fleeing merchant ship. But atmospheric flight was a different game than space combat, and Marcus had grown up on a planet where flying through storms was considered a recreational activity. He pushed the Stellar Prophet through maneuvers that no sane pilot would attempt, using gravity wells and atmospheric currents to throw off the cruiser's targeting systems. The ship groaned and protested, but it held together through sheer stubbornness and Marcus's refusal to accept the possibility of failure. "There," Sarah said, pointing to a cluster of readings on the surface. "That looks like some kind of processing facility. If we could get inside, we might be able to access their communication systems." "And do what?" "Send a strongly worded letter." "No," Sarah said, her voice taking on a determined edge. "Download their operational database. If we can get proof of what they're doing here, we can expose the entire operation." Marcus looked at the facility she had indicated. It was heavily defended, surrounded by automated weapon systems, and patrolled by hegemony security forces. Landing near it would be suicide, and infiltrating it would be impossible for any reasonable species, which was exactly why it might work. You know what the problem is with the hegemony? Marcus asked, adjusting their descent angle to bring them closer to the facility. They're too logical. They plan for every reasonable contingency, but they can't imagine anyone being crazy enough to try the unreasonable ones. Marcus, whatever you're thinking, please tell me it's not as insane as your last plan. Oh, it's much worse than that. Marcus grinned as he lined up their approach vector. I'm going to crash land a damaged merchant ship in the middle of a heavily fortified military installation, then walk in the front door and ask to use their computer. That's not a plan. That's suicide with extra steps. Maybe, but it's also the last thing they'll expect. The stellar prophet hit the surface of Xerion, 3 with enough force to register on seismic sensors across the continent. Marcus had chosen their impact point carefully, close enough to the hegemony facility to reach it on foot, but far enough away to make their crash look accidental rather than intentional. The ship's emergency systems activated automatically, flooding the bridge with fire suppressant foam and sealing hull breaches with emergency patches. When the chaos settled, Marcus found himself hanging upside down in his restraints, blood running from a gash on his forehead, but alive. Status report, he called out, struggling to free himself from the damaged control station. I'm alive, Sarah's voice came from somewhere behind him. Bruised, probably concussed, but alive. How about you, Kethvor? The Vorthack captain's response was a groaning sound that Sarah interpreted as general displeasure with the situation. The rest of the crew were unconscious but breathing, their natural resilience having saved them from more serious injury. Marcus managed to extract himself from the wreckage of the navigation station and survey their situation. The Stellar Prophet was a total loss. Her engines were dead, her hull was cracked in multiple places, and her life support systems were running on emergency power. But they were on the ground, they were alive, and they were within walking distance of their target. Gather whatever supplies you can carry, Marcus told the others as they slowly regained consciousness. We're going to have to move fast. Those cruisers will be sending ground teams to investigate the crash site. Kethvor struggled to his feet, his scales showing colors that Sarah was beginning to associate with extreme stress. Human Marcus, even if we reach the hegemony facility, how do you propose we gain entry? Their security will be completely focused on keeping people out, Marcus finished. But they won't be expecting people to walk involuntarily. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood at the edge of the crash site, studying the hegemony facility through a pair of salvage binoculars. The installation was exactly what he had expected, efficient, logical, and designed to repel external attacks. Guard towers monitored the perimeter, energy barriers prevented unauthorized access, and automated weapon systems covered every approach route. But there was one thing the hegemony designers hadn't accounted for. They had built their facility to withstand military assault, but they had also included standard humanitarian protocols for dealing with crash survivors. After all, leaving potential witnesses to die in the open would raise uncomfortable questions later. There, Sarah said, pointing toward the facility's main gate. Emergency response team heading toward us. Marcus smiled. The rescue team consisted of 4 hegemony soldiers in environmental suits, carrying medical supplies and scanning equipment. They were following standard protocols for investigating crash sites, secure the area, evacuate survivors, conduct debriefings to determine what had happened. Remember, Marcus said as the rescue team approached their position, we're traumatized crash survivors who are grateful to be rescued. Let me do the talking. The lead soldier, a tall insectoid creature with compound eyes and multiple arms, approached them with what passed for concern among his species. Survivors identified. Medical condition appears stable. Please remain calm while we conduct preliminary assessment. Thank you, Marcus said, allowing relief and exhaustion to color his voice. We thought we were going to die out here. Our ship lost power during atmospheric entry, and we couldn't control the descent. Understood. You will be transported to processing facility for medical evaluation and debriefing. Please follow designated routes and comply with security protocols. Marcus nodded gratefully, playing the role of a shaken civilian who was happy to be rescued. The hegemony soldiers escorted them toward the facility, their attention focused on potential external threats rather than the 3 aliens they were rescuing. As they passed through the facility's main gate, Marcus got his first close look at the hegemony operation. It was even more extensive than he had realized. Massive construction projects were underway across the entire complex, with automated systems working around the clock to build what was clearly intended to be a permanent military base. Processing facility is located in Sector 7, the lead soldier informed them. Medical evaluation will be conducted prior to transfer to holding areas. Holding areas? Sarah asked, her voice carefully modulated to sound like innocent curiosity rather than suspicion. Standard quarantine procedures. All off-world visitors must be processed before release. Planetary health protocols. Marcus exchanged glances with Sarah and Kethvor. They weren't being rescued. They were being captured. The hegemony couldn't allow witnesses to their operation to survive, but they also couldn't simply execute crash survivors without raising suspicions. So they were planning to process them through official channels, probably with memory modification or worse. But that also meant they would have access to the facility's internal systems during the processing procedure. And that was exactly what Marcus needed. Of course, he said, maintaining his grateful civilian demeanor. We understand completely. Thank you for your help. As they were led deeper into the facility, Marcus began mentally cataloging everything he saw: guard positions, security systems, communication arrays, and, most importantly, the locations of the computer terminals that would give them access to the hegemony's operational database. The hunt for the truth was about to enter its most dangerous phase. But Marcus had learned long ago that the most dangerous moments were often when the greatest opportunities presented themselves. And right now, he was walking into the heart of an enemy installation with the chance to expose one of the most audacious invasion attempts in galactic history. All he had to do was survive long enough to tell the story. The hegemony processing facility was a masterpiece of cold efficiency. Marcus, Sarah, and Kethvor were separated immediately upon entry, each escorted to different sections of the complex for what their captors described as routine medical evaluation and debriefing procedures. Marcus found himself in a sterile white room, facing a hegemony interrogation specialist, a tall, pale humanoid with silver eyes and an unsettling ability to remain perfectly motionless for extended periods. Crash survivor designation, human primary, the interrogator said, consulting a data pad with mechanical precision. State designation and purpose in Xerian system. Marcus had prepared for this moment during their walk through the facility. The key to a successful deception wasn't just telling believable lies. It was telling lies that the listener wanted to hear. And, right now, the hegemony wanted to believe that they had captured harmless civilians who posed no threat to their operation. Marcus Chun, independent trader, he replied, allowing his voice to shake slightly with what appeared to be residual trauma from the crash. We were transporting medical supplies to the quarantine zone when our ship lost power. I thought the atmospheric entry was going to kill us. The interrogator's silver eyes fixed on him with unblinking intensity. Medical supplies. Specify cargo manifest and point of origin. Vaccines and diagnostic equipment from the Confederate Medical Depot at Kepler Station. We were hired by Vorthack Merchant Guild to make the delivery. Marcus leaned forward slightly, projecting the desperation of someone trying to be helpful. Look, I don't know what's going on down here, but if there's really a plague, those supplies could save lives. Can you get them to whoever needs them? It was a masterful performance. Marcus presented himself as exactly what the hegemony expected, a naive human who had stumbled into their operation by accident and was too stupid to realize what he was seeing. The interrogator made notes on his datapad, his expression showing the kind of contempt that predators felt for prey that wandered too close to their hunting grounds. Cargo will be evaluated for contamination before disposal, the interrogator said, dismissively. Current planetary conditions require strict adherence to quarantine protocols. Disposal. Marcus let concern creep into his voice. But people are dying. Why would you destroy medical supplies? Questions regarding planetary administration are beyond your clearance level. Focus on providing accurate information regarding your vessel's presence in this system. Marcus spent the next hour weaving a careful web of half-truths and misdirections, always staying just this side of believable while gathering as much information as possible about the facility's operations. The interrogator was thorough, but not particularly imaginative, following standard hegemony protocols that were designed to extract information from conventional prisoners. Unfortunately for the hegemony, Marcus was far from conventional. While answering questions about shipping manifests and flight plans, Marcus was simultaneously observing everything about his environment. The interrogation room had 3 data ports, 2 of which were currently active. The door lock used a biometric scanner keyed to hegemony physiological markers. The ventilation system was designed for hegemony atmospheric requirements, which meant it would be slightly toxic to humans over extended periods. Most importantly, the interrogator's datapad was connected to the facility's main network. Marcus could see the connection icon in the corner of the device's display every time the alien turned it toward him. One touch of the right sequence of controls would give him access to the hegemony's operational database. The question was how to get that access without alerting security. Marcus had learned long ago that the best time to make a move was when your enemies were most confident in their control over the situation. Right now, the hegemony believed they had captured 3 harmless civilians who posed no threat to their operation. Their guard was down, their procedures were routine, and they were focused on processing prisoners rather than watching for potential security breaches. One final question, the interrogator said, apparently nearing the end of his standard checklist. Are you aware of any other vessels that may have observed your ship's distress before atmospheric entry? No, Marcus replied. We were alone out there. If anyone else had seen us crash, they probably would have tried to help. He paused, then added with what he hoped sounded like genuine curiosity. Actually, can I ask you something? How long before we can get off this planet? I mean, I know there's a plague and everything, but we're not infected. We were never even in the quarantine zone before we crashed. The interrogator's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught the slight pause before he responded. Transportation arrangements will be determined following completion of processing procedures. Translation: they were never leaving this planet alive. Marcus nodded as if the non-answer was completely satisfactory, then did something that would have horrified any species with a properly functioning sense of self-preservation. He lunged forward across the table, grabbed the interrogator's datapad, and began rapidly entering commands before the startled alien could react. The interrogator's silver eyes widened in surprise, probably the first genuine emotion Marcus had seen from him. He reached for an alarm control, but Marcus was already moving. A lifetime of training in close-quarters combat served him well as he used the alien's own momentum to send him crashing into the wall behind him. Sorry about this, Marcus said conversationally as the interrogator slumped to the floor, unconscious. But I really needed to borrow your computer. The datapad's interface was designed for hegemony users, but Marcus had spent enough time around alien technology to recognize basic patterns. Within moments, he had accessed the facility's main database and begun downloading everything he could find about their operation on Zirion 3. What he discovered was worse than he had imagined. The hegemony hadn't just faked a plague to establish a military base. They had created an actual biological weapon designed to target specific genetic markers found in Confederate species. The quarantine zone was a testing ground where they were perfecting the weapon before deploying it across Confederate space. The medical supplies that Marcus and his companions had been carrying weren't just diagnostic equipment. They were specifically designed to detect the artificial plague and expose the hegemony's bioweapon program. Someone in Confederate intelligence had suspected what was happening on Zirion 3, and they had used the merchant ship as a cover for an investigation. which meant that Marcus and his companions weren't random crash survivors who had stumbled into a military operation. They were targets who had been marked for elimination the moment they agreed to transport those supplies. The data download was nearly complete when alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Marcus had maybe 2 minutes before security teams reached his location. He needed to find Sarah and Kethvor, get them out of the facility, and somehow transmit the downloaded intelligence to Confederate forces. It was an impossible task that would require split-second timing, perfect execution, and a considerable amount of luck. In other words, it was exactly the kind of challenge that humans seem to excel at. Marcus pocketed the datapad and moved to the door. The biometric lock was designed for hegemony physiology, but it was also an emergency system that could be overridden in case of facility-wide alerts. The blaring alarms provided exactly the kind of emergency condition that would trigger automatic unlock protocols. The corridor outside was chaos. Hegemony security forces were rushing toward what they assumed was the source of the security breach, while automated systems tried to determine the nature of the threat. Marcus slipped into the controlled confusion, moving with purpose but without the obvious urgency that would mark him as anything other than another piece of moving equipment in a busy facility. He found Sarah 2 levels down in what appeared to be a medical evaluation chamber. She was conscious but restrained, connected to monitoring equipment that was probably analyzing her genetic structure for weaknesses that could be exploited by their bioweapon. "Marcus," she whispered as he entered the chamber. "How did you?" "Never mind, just get me out of these restraints." "Working on it," Marcus replied, examining the alien restraint system. Like most hegemony technology, it was efficient but not particularly creative. A few well-placed adjustments with his multi-tool and the restraints released their hold. "We need to find Kethvor and get out of here. I've got the intelligence we need, but it won't matter if we can't transmit it." "What did you find?" "They're not just planning to invade Confederate space," Marcus said as they moved through the facility's corridors, avoiding the main security response teams. "They're planning to sterilize it. The plague is a bioweapon designed to kill every Confederate species and leave their worlds empty for hegemony colonization." Sarah's face went pale. That's genocide on a galactic scale, which is why we need to stop it." They found Kethvor in a detention cell 3 levels deeper in the facility. The Vorthack captain was conscious but clearly drugged, his scales showing patterns that suggested disorientation and confusion. Marcus worked quickly to bypass the cell's electronic lock, while Sarah kept watch for approaching guards. "Human Marcus?" Kethvor's voice was slurred but functional. Where are we?" "In the middle of a hegemony bioweapon facility," Marcus replied, helping the alien to his feet. "Can you walk?" "I believe so. But, human, how do we escape? This facility is heavily defended." Marcus smiled grimly. "We're not going to escape. We're going to do something much more dangerous." "What?" "We're going to make sure every species in the galaxy knows what the hegemony is planning." The facility's main communication array was located at the top of the central tower, surrounded by the heaviest defenses in the complex. Reaching it would require getting past automated weapons systems, security checkpoints, and an unknown number of guards. It was a textbook example of an impossible mission, which was exactly why Marcus was confident it would work. "Here's what we're going to do," he explained as they moved through the facility's service corridors, avoiding the main security response. The hegemony has spent so much effort securing this place against external attack that they've forgotten about internal threats. We're going to use their own systems against them. "How?" Sarah asked. Marcus pulled out the stolen datapad and showed them the facility schematics he had downloaded. Every major hegemony installation has an emergency protocol for evacuating critical personnel in case of catastrophic system failure. If we can trigger that protocol, it will override security systems and open direct communication channels to hegemony high command. "But that would also alert them to what we're doing," Kethvor pointed out. "Exactly," Marcus replied. "And when they open those communication channels to find out what's happening, we'll be waiting to broadcast our intelligence data to every Confederate monitoring station in this sector of space. It was a plan that relied on timing, luck, and the hegemony's own paranoia about their secret project. If everything went according to plan, they would have approximately 30 seconds to transmit the bioweapon data before being overwhelmed by security forces. If anything went wrong, they would all be dead within minutes. But, as Marcus had learned during his years as an independent investigator, sometimes the only way to save lives was to risk everything on a single desperate gamble. And right now, the lives of every Confederate citizen in the galaxy hung in the balance. The hunt was about to reach its climax, and Marcus Chund was ready to show the galaxy why humans never gave up on the trail. The climb to the facility's communication array tested every limit of human endurance and alien cooperation. Marcus led the way through maintenance shafts and service corridors that were barely wide enough for Keth Vor's bulk, while Sarah translated the increasingly urgent security announcements that echoed through the facility's communication systems. "They know we're not in the detention areas anymore," she reported as they paused at a junction between two ventilation systems. "Security teams are conducting systematic searches of every level." Marcus checked the stolen data pad for their position relative to the communication tower. "We're almost there. 2 more levels, and we'll reach the main array." "And then what?" Keth Vor asked, his scales showing colors that Sarah had learned to associate with exhaustion. "Even if we reach the communication equipment, how do we activate the emergency protocols?" "Leave that to me," Marcus replied, though privately he was still working out the details of that particular challenge. The hegemony emergency protocols were designed to respond to catastrophic facility failures, explosions, containment breaches, or complete system failures that threaten the installation's operational security. Fortunately, Marcus had always been good at causing catastrophic system failures. They emerged from the ventilation system into a maintenance bay 3 levels below the communication array. The area was deserted, but Marcus could hear the sound of security forces moving through nearby corridors. Their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. "Sarah, I need you to access that terminal and start a diagnostic scan of the facility's power distribution system," Marcus said, pointing to a control station near the center of the bay. "Keth Vor, help me with these power coupling units." "What are you planning to do?" Sarah asked, though she was already moving toward the terminal. "I'm going to overload the facility's main power grid," Marcus replied, beginning to open access panels on the massive power couplings that fed energy to the upper levels of the installation. When the emergency protocols activate, all communication channels will open automatically to allow for coordination of evacuation procedures. That will also cut power to life support, Keth Vor observed with typical Vorthack practicality. "Only for about 10 minutes, Marcus said, making rapid adjustments to the power flow regulators. "Long enough for us to transmit the intelligence data, but not long enough to kill anyone." It was a typically human solution to an impossible problem. Create a bigger problem that forced everyone to respond in predictable ways, then exploit the chaos that resulted. Any sane species would have considered it an insanely risky plan with too many variables to control, which was exactly why it had a chance of working. Sarah's fingers flew over the alien interface as she initiated diagnostic protocols that would stress test every power system in the facility. Within moments, warning indicators began flashing across multiple displays as the computer detected what appeared to be critical failures throughout the installation's infrastructure. "Power grid showing multiple anomalies," she reported. "The system thinks the entire facility is about to suffer a catastrophic failure." "Perfect," Marcus said, making final adjustments to the power couplings. "Keth Vor, when I give the signal, I need you to physically disconnect these coupling units. The sudden loss of power will trigger automatic emergency protocols. And if the protocols don't activate, then we'll have about 30 seconds to figure out a backup plan before security forces storm this maintenance bay." Marcus moved to the terminal where Sarah was working and began uploading the stolen intelligence data to a transmission buffer. The file contained everything they had learned about the hegemony bioweapon program. Technical specifications, target lists, deployment schedules, and, most importantly, proof that the plague on Zirian 3 was an artificial creation designed to test the weapon's effectiveness. "Ready," Sarah announced. "The system is primed to transmit on all available channels the moment communication restrictions are lifted." Marcus nodded and turned to Kethfor. "On my mark now." The Vorthat captain's forearms moved with surprising speed, disconnecting power couplings that had been designed to handle the energy output of a small star. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Emergency lighting activated throughout the facility as primary power systems went offline, and the deep throb of the main reactor shifted to the higher-pitched whine of emergency backup power. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, exactly as Marcus had hoped, the facility's emergency communication protocols activated. "All station personnel, implement Evacuation Protocol 7. An automated voice announced over the facility's communication system. "Emergency communication channels are now active. Repeat, all external communication restrictions are suspended pending facility evacuation." "Now," Marcus shouted. Sarah activated the transmission sequence, sending the intelligence data racing through subspace communication channels toward every Confederate monitoring station within range. The transmission would take several minutes to reach its destinations, but once it arrived, the truth about the hegemony bioweapon program would be impossible to suppress. The celebration was short-lived. Security forces had finally located their position, and the maintenance bay's main entrance exploded inward as hegemony soldiers blasted through the reinforced doors. Energy weapons filled the air with deadly light as the aliens opened fire on what they probably assumed were saboteurs trying to destroy the facility. Marcus dove behind a bank of control equipment, pulling Sarah down beside him as energy beams scarred the walls where they had been standing. Kethfor, moving with surprising agility for someone his size, took cover behind one of the disconnected power coupling units. "Transmission progress," Marcus shouted over the sound of weapons fire. 60% complete, Sarah replied, her hands still flying over the control interface despite the chaos around them. "We need more time." Time was the one thing they didn't have. Marcus could hear additional security forces arriving outside the maintenance bay, and it was only a matter of moments before they would be overwhelmed. But 60% of the transmission wasn't enough. The intelligence data was useless unless the complete files reached Confederate authorities, which meant Marcus needed to buy them more time, regardless of the cost. "Keep transmitting," he told Sarah. "No matter what happens, don't stop until that file is completely uploaded." "Marcus, what are you planning?" Instead of answering, Marcus stood up from behind cover and walked directly toward the advancing security forces. Energy weapons swung toward him, but something in his posture, the calm confidence of a predator that had finally cornered its prey, made the alien soldiers hesitate. "Do you know what the problem is with your species?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of weapons and alarms. "You're all so focused on being logical and efficient that you forgot something important about humans." The lead security officer, a tall insectoid with compound eyes and multiple arms, kept his weapon trained on Marcus but didn't fire. "Surrender immediately. You are under arrest for sabotage and espionage." "We're persistence hunters," Marcus continued, ignoring the weapon pointed at him. "For millions of years, we chased our prey across continents and through seasons, never giving up, never stopping until we got what we came for." "Your transmission will not reach Confederate forces," the officer said. "Our jamming systems will intercept." "Your jamming systems went offline when we triggered the emergency protocols," Marcus interrupted, "which you would know if you had been paying attention instead of following standard operational procedures." The officer's compound eyes shifted as he accessed his communication interface, probably checking on the status of the facility's defensive systems. Marcus could see the exact moment when he realized the truth. The emergency protocols had indeed suspended jamming operations, and The intelligence transmission was already racing toward Confederate space. Transmission complete, Sarah announced from behind her cover. All data successfully uploaded to Confederate monitoring stations. Marcus smiled. You lose. The security officer raised his weapon, but Marcus was already moving. The years he had spent investigating dangerous cases had taught him that the most important skill for a human in a hostile galaxy wasn't marksmanship or tactics. It was the ability to think faster and move quicker than aliens who were bigger, stronger, and better armed. The insectoid's weapon discharged, but Marcus had anticipated the shot. He rolled sideways, came up behind a support pillar, and drew his primitive projectile pistol in a single fluid motion. The weapon that every alien species dismissed as obsolete proved its worth as Marcus put 3 rounds center mass into the security officer's chest. The other hegemony soldiers opened fire, but they were operating in an environment that had suddenly become chaotic and unpredictable. Emergency lighting made targeting difficult. Damaged power systems created unexpected obstacles. And, most importantly, they were fighting an opponent who refused to follow the logical rules of engagement. Marcus moved through the maintenance bay like a force of nature, using every piece of cover and every system malfunction to his advantage. His projectile weapon might have been primitive by galactic standards, but it was also completely silent compared to energy weapons, making it nearly impossible for the aliens to track his position by sound. Within minutes, the security team was either dead or retreating. Marcus emerged from cover to find Sarah and Kethvor staring at him with expressions that mixed admiration with something approaching fear. Is it over? Sarah asked. The immediate threat is neutralized, Marcus replied, checking his weapon's ammunition. But we still need to get off this planet before reinforcements arrive. How? Our ship is destroyed, and the hegemony will have every transport route covered. Marcus walked to the maintenance bay's main window and looked out at the facility below. In the distance, he could see the launching platforms where hegemony vessels were already preparing for departure, probably evacuating critical personnel and equipment before Confederate forces arrived to investigate. We're going to steal one of their ships, he announced. Kethvor's scales went through a series of color changes that Sarah interpreted as extreme incredulity. Human Marcus, that is impossible. Hegemony vessels require biometric authorization, genetic verification, and command codes that only their military personnel possess, all of which can be bypassed if you know how their systems work, Marcus replied. And thanks to the intelligence data we downloaded, I know exactly how their systems work. The escape from Zirian 3 would later become the stuff of legend in Confederate space. Marcus, Sarah, and Kethvor fought their way through a facility in full evacuation mode, commandeered a hegemony transport vessel, and blasted their way through a defensive perimeter that should have been impenetrable. But the real victory had already been achieved. The intelligence data was spreading through Confederate communication networks, exposing the hegemony bioweapon program and alerting military forces throughout the galaxy to the threat. Within hours, Confederate fleets would arrive at Zirian 3 to find a hastily abandoned hegemony installation and enough evidence to prove that one of the galaxy's major powers had been planning genocide on an unprecedented scale. The political fallout would reshape galactic relations for decades. The hegemony would face economic sanctions, military interventions, and the kind of diplomatic isolation that ended empires. Their bioweapon program will be dismantled, their military leaders tried for war crimes, and their expansion plans permanently curtailed. But perhaps the most significant result of the Zirian incident was the change in how the galaxy viewed humanity. Marcus Chun had begun the mission as an underestimated species member, a primitive human with obsolete weapons and reckless tactics. He ended it as something much more dangerous, a hunter who had tracked his prey across star systems, unraveled a conspiracy that threatened billions of lives, and demonstrated that humans were not just unpredictable survivors, but apex predators capable of taking down threats that entire civilizations found insurmountable. Word of the humans' actions spread quickly through galactic communication networks. The story grew in the telling. A single human had infiltrated a heavily defended military installation, stolen critical intelligence, and single-handedly prevented a genocidal war. The details varied depending on who was telling the story, but the core message remained consistent. Humans were no longer the galaxy's newest and least experienced species. They were its most dangerous hunters, and those who threatened innocent lives did so at their own peril. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of a Confederate space station, watching cargo ships deliver medical supplies to worlds that were finally free from the threat of artificial plagues. Sarah had taken a position with Confederate intelligence, using her linguistic skills to help prevent future incidents like the one on Zirion 3. Kethvor had returned to merchant trading, though he now charged premium rates for transportation services that included human security consultation. Any regrets? Sarah asked, joining Marcus at the observation window. Marcus considered the question. The mission had cost him his reputation as a harmless independent investigator. Now every criminal organization and hostile government in the galaxy knew his name and considered him a target. His life would be significantly more dangerous from this point forward. None, he said finally. This is what humans do. We hunt down the threats that everyone else is too afraid to face, and we don't stop until the job is done. Sarah nodded, understanding. In a galaxy full of species that had evolved beyond their predatory origins, humans remained what they had always been, persistent hunters who never gave up on the trail. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other threats were stirring, other conspiracies were forming, and other innocent lives were being placed in danger. Marcus Chun was ready for them all.